Hi there. Today I'm going to talk about Infinite Ryvius. It's an anime that I finished about probably a little bit more than a month ago, but I really enjoyed it. It just had a lot of enjoyable aspects to it, and I think what I enjoyed about it the most were basically the themes, which is how I actually found out about it, well, kinda sorta. I also finished watching Fafner, as you may or may not know, due to my other reviews, and it I don't know, Fafner, it's an anime, there's a review, if you've heard, so you can watch that if you want. But anyway, no, so the way I found out about it was actually through the character designer of Fafner. He did the character designer for Gundam, as a lot of people may know, and then he also did it for Infinite Ryvius in about 1999, I want to say. It might be even later than that. But it was basically in-space anime, and it's pretty decent. I mean, because I think one of my main kind of pet peeves about anime is sometimes how it'll go into, people being very moe, or, kind of like, just blah, 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 and then like making faces and, I don't know, having big squints. And it doesn't really move the story forward, and there's almost none of that in Infinite Ryvius. And I think it really works to the betterment of the story. It allows the story to move forward at an acceptable pace. There's really never a episode, I think, that's filler, necessarily. Like, every episode, it's weird, because it's almost as though there's, like, 10 different stories going on at once. And, maybe in one episode you'll get 2 threads of the story, another 3. I mean, I don't know if it ever goes beyond 3, really. So, there's that going on. And hopefully you kind of understood that. But basically, as the story goes on, as it begins, there's basically, it's the future, usual, and there's a space colony in space, and apparently it's used for, I guess, teaching children to be future space pilots, or at least space astronauts, or just dealing in space in general. A little problem I have with it, though, is that the genders or whatever, like, are very sexual, or at least the job descriptions are very, gender related. Like, there's about the three, I guess you could call them main female leads or whatever, or at least the 3 love interests, let's call them that. They're very, what they're doing on the space school station is learning how to be flight attendants. And the main male leads, do you want to know what they're doing, or take a guess? They're learning how to be engineers and pilots, and pretty much a bunch of, like, manly male roles are just, things of power and captains and sorts of things like that, very mentally related, as opposed to, the women are mostly relegated to physical duty, like cooking and cleaning and, things like that. And so that's kind of a problem, but I mean, I guess the only way to really defend it is by saying it was 10 years ago, and so, or at least it was made 10 years ago, and so there's kind of that to it, is that no matter how far into the future you set your, piece of fiction, you're always going to be looking at it through the mindset of your own, and you are a product of your times. So I think that's really the only thing I can really say about it. But getting back to the story, so basically there's this space station in space, and there's a bunch of students on it, and there's also teachers. So, things are alright, at least in that aspect. And so eventually there's a problem over, everyone's about to go on spring break, and for some reason not the Ryvius, but the space station is sinking into a gas giant. Now, I forget what the gas giant is called. I believe it's called the Gestalt. I might be wrong about that, or just completely off at all. But it's very weird how they set up the Gestalt or whatever, or at least you're never, as a viewer, you're never knowing where it is in relation to things. The basic plot of the gas giant is that it's in the solar system, and it was created after some kind of space problem. And apparently it goes from the sun all the way out to Pluto. But like, here's the thing, is like, you don't know where it is, like, like if this is, Earth, the Sun, Mercury, well, I guess yeah, if you consider how things rotate around the sun. But if planets are on a singular line and they're not like, kind of all over the place, um, so you never know where the gas giant is. Like, is it on the same plane or is it lower, or things like that. And so as a viewer, you're always like, wait, why are they moving in, 2 or 3 dimensions, or well, why are they only moving in 2 dimensions in space when it's a 3-dimensional thing? So, that's always just one thing that I just had a problem with. Maybe other people won't, but that was just me. So they're sinking into the gas giant, and basically the point of it is that, if they go too far into it, they're going to get crushed, kind of like in the ocean. It basically really is submarines in space. That's really what the anime really felt like, a lot to me at least. But it was nice. It was, they do it well. I mean, that's one thing I think it can't really be denied, at least from my opinion. So, moving on. The teachers. Apparently there's only 3 of them. And I think they actually state at one point that there's like 2,000 students, on the space station. But, I guess they could get around that by saying, since it was going to be spring break-ish or whatever, there was basically some holiday where all the students were going to go away. Maybe they downsized the teacher population as well. But, it's kind of like, why would you get rid of the teachers before the students, that kind of problem. But, again, it's one of those things, it's like, don't think about it, just enjoy the story. And it is pretty enjoyable, at least for me. So, the teachers, they're trying to help the students, not sink into the gas giant to be crushed. And they end up having to go outside, because apparently when you build a space station, you put all the important controls on the outside of the spaceship. It's really just so that they can kill off the teachers, which is what ends up happening. The teachers go outside, and apparently there's some kind of electrical thing, and they all die. The teachers, at least. But luckily they do that thing where they accomplished what they were trying to do, and so the students get control of the space station, and they're able to fly out of the gas giant safe. And at that point, they find out that they were actually terrorists on board. And they were actually the ones who programmed the space station to go sink into the gas giant to be crushed. Or at least, for some kind of reason that's not really left known to the audience or to the characters themselves at that moment. So anyway, they capture the, what is it? I guess you could say, the terrorists. They are terrorists in a sense. It's never really declared what their relationship is to everything, but basically their goal was to sink it into the gas giant so that it would come out with a bigger spaceship. And that's what happens, if you want to imagine the space station as just, the size of a finger, maybe even less, a thumb. When they come out of it, there's basically a space station, or a spaceship attached to it that's, quite larger. And it's called they call it the Ryvius, or Ryvius, and I watched it dubbed, not subtitled. So I never really quite found out, how did they find out the name of it? Was it written on the side of the ship or something, or what? And so that was just kind of a personal issue for me, at least. How do they know the name of it? Or did they just name it that? I don't know. Anyway, so that goes on, and it's enjoyable for the most part. Basically, it was very easy. It was almost too easy, and that was what kind of bothered me about it. Apparently on the spaceship that they're all going to get on now, there are no doors. It's just an opening for all the rooms, and it's just that would create problems, especially for children or teenagers, and so that's kind of something that I thought wasn't really addressed. It would have been a little bit more understandable, at least in my opinion. Anyway, so there's a group over the pilots over, I forget what they're called, the Zwei, I believe. I forget what that is. That sounds German. I want to say Zwei is German for, what is it, 3 or 5? I don't remember. It's been a while since I've started my Deutsch. Anyway, moving on. So the Zwei, they are the pilots, and they naturally assume command, and because you probably want your pilots in control even if they're the meanest people. Luckily, they're very just to her, and they have a very kind of, sort of almost democratic, or at least autocratic, or republic in a sense, kind of society. And that gets into the themes that I was mentioning earlier. The show has about 3 themes, I want to say, in it. One being, I believe it was friendship, but all anime is about friendship or teamwork on some level. But the second one was about power, and the other one was about governments. And I think they do the government's theme very well. The other two, it's kind of like, power they do alright, but, the friendship, or I really want to find it. I think it was friendship. And that one they don't do so well. Like, they do it, but they do it comparable to every other anime. Like, the friendship theme from Inuyasha is comparable to the theme from this, in a sense. Where people just come together and be friends and work together. So that's what it is, basically, in terms of the friendship theme. But the government theme they do pretty well, although it's not as, like, hitting you over the head, so you really kind of have to read into it just a little bit. But it's there, and it's definitely, they do it well. It's not corny or bad, in my opinion. Anyway, so moving back to those terrorists that I was talking to for a bit, they're tied up on the other ship, or at least the first space station. And it's never really explained, like, how did they know, like, if they sink a space station into the Gestalt, that it would come out with a bigger spaceship? Like, that's never explained. Apparently, that's what happens when you put smaller things into gas giants and come out. Like, it's never really explained. It is explained that, there are basically, like, these squid-like monsters, or not really monsters, but beings living in the Gestalt. And so they actually tend to do that, I guess? I don't know. They turn into spaceships. Yeah, and they take on human forms. But, like, it's never really, like, explained. And granted, it doesn't necessarily need to be explained, but it's one of those things where it's like, if you make a reference to, whether or not God exists in your movie, that's alright, but if it's a thrust, or at least a very important component inside your story, you're probably going to need to talk about it just a little bit. And, it's something that they're constantly on, like, they're on the spaceship for the next, 22 episodes or so. So, I mean, they probably should talk about it just a little bit more, or at least discover a little bit about it. But, oh well, it doesn't really happen necessarily. But moving on from there, basically from there on, it goes into, what should I say, eventually there's this group of bullies or whatever, and I really liked this element because it just felt so true in my opinion. Basically, one of the Zwei was a kind of a fat kid or whatever, and he, he's very stereotypical in that, very easy to make fun of and things like that. And there's this group of bullies, and they have 2 girls in their group or whatever. And, obviously what the girls are there to do. Again, getting back to my point about women earlier, where women are shown in very kind of submissive or, gender roles in a sense. Basically, the only reason why those 2 women are in the bully group are as not really sex slaves, and they never really show sex, but it's definitely, like, implied that they're there for some kind of sexual attention and use and things like that. And so they basically used one of the girls to sort of seduce Charlie and say, like, oh, don't worry, we'll bring the terrorists food. And actually they end up beating up the terrorists and things like that, and actually torturing them a bit. And so eventually the bully group actually kind of gets the upper hand. They get some very vital information from the Zwei, and they end up turning public opinion against the Zwei to make them sort of a subordinate to them, placing the bullies on top. And going back to the government theme real quick, this is where it kind of becomes a despot or totalitarian government, where they are shown to be very efficient. Like, it's not just like, oh, they're dictators, therefore everything is bad now. They actually do some really great things. They introduce currency to the ship, and they give people jobs to make them do labor, and they actually even have safety, law and order. And so the amount of efficiency is very, a compelling debate for totalitarian dictatorships. So I really appreciate that. It wasn't just like, oh, a way that I think like an American cartoon would do it as, oh, people aren't allowed to vote for their leaders, therefore everything is bad, even the food. And, this does it a lot better in my opinion. So anyway, moving on. The pilots and the bullies are actually all given infinite credits though, so that's one thing to kind of like consider. And again, that kind of goes back to the theme of government and things like that. And so basically, eventually they find out that their spaceship has a robot on it that they can use. And really, I kind of disliked the robot part, but I also liked it as well. Like, the thing I disliked about it was, it's not important that it's a robot. It could just be a missile or a gun or anything. And that's what I liked about it, was how interchangeable it is, but it just felt like they were doing the mecha thing as sort of like shiny toy for fanboys. And so that's what I disliked about it. Because it being a robot didn't matter at all. It could have been a gun or a missile or a laser or even a hammer. It just didn't matter at all. It was just there for fanboys. And so that was my problem with it, was just how transparent it was. But, as opposed to making it important, I guess I do prefer it being as transparent and shallow as it is. Anyway, so they use this robot to fight other robots, because when they try to go home to Earth, they're declared terrorists as by their government. And so, but it's never really discussed why. Like, it's kind of implied that the people who originally hijacked the space station to make it sink into the Gestalt were hired by the government, but it's never really discussed, because at one point later in the series, like around episode 16, the president or vice president says something along the lines of, get me so and so, and it almost seems like they're mercenaries more so than they're, parts of the military or anything like that. So that was just like kind of my problem with it. Anyway, moving on. So yeah, eventually though, around episode 16, getting back to the bullies, what's his name? Blue, the leader of the bullies, who's kind of the dictator at this point, he actually suggests that they run away over to, was it Uranus or Saturn or one of Jupiter's moons? I think it might have been Titan. It was one of those three planets. It doesn't really matter which one, because the planets are very interchangeable. And that was another little problem I had. Like, when I saw the gas giant, I assumed that meant that they were out of the solar system, but no, that actually meant they were right by Earth. So basically they go from Earth, to Mars and Jupiter and out to the outer system. So, that was just kind of something that bugged me, like, just because I can't imagine having a gas giant in the solar system would be very good, because, we need plants, and plants need sunlight, and gas is not great for showing sunlight. Unless, it is, like, used in a refracting sense. But granted, this whole, like, segment, past 30 seconds I've spent talking about, is never really discussed at all. It's just, here's a gas giant, it's used as an ocean, and the ships are basically submarines. That's the story pretty much. Or at least in terms of the action part. And so, yeah, so Blue wants to run away, and he actually says, the robot actually detaches from the ship, to go fight. And so they're actually on the spaceship for the robot, which also detaches from the ship. And so he's like, well, let's just run away, leave everyone else behind. And it actually ends up getting broadcasted over the spaceship. And of course, when they get back on the ship, all the bullies are arrested and things like that. And the bullies are overthrown. And so then the Zwei are installed back in power. And it's, it's pretty decent, I like how the Zwei actually end up adopting the policies of the bullies, but they actually end up doing it in a sense that is not as efficient. Crime becomes more common, and punishment and working efficiency isn't as motivated, because the original motivation was work or we'll beat you, and now it's, work or we'll yell at you. And so, one is less motivating than the other. Anyway, so moving back, they actually, it's pretty enjoyable and things like that. And it goes on from there for another 8 episodes or so. They actually find out that one of the plants is destroyed, but it doesn't really matter. And you find out why they were going to that plant anyway was because Blue's dad was the prime minister. And so that's another thing about intergalactic politics. It's never really discussed. It's like, alright, so is each planet their own country? And if so, why would the son of the prime minister be on an Earth space station? Is that some kind of like goodwill thing or what? Again, it never really discussed, and it's not necessarily important, but it's just one of those things where it's like if you think about it for 3 seconds, it doesn't make sense. But oh well. So getting back to the story, the main character is, I really disliked him, but that I kind of get that was like the point. He's weak. He's basically like Shinji from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Weak, not very self-confident. Really weak is his main characteristic. I mean, really, the characters are almost like exactly the same. It's kind of disturbing on some level. I think the main character from Ryvius just has slightly longer hair. I can't even remember his name. Like, I want to say his name, but it's just like the only thing that comes up is Shinji, and it's just like, no, wrong character. Anyway. So I really like him though. I like his arc at least, because it starts off with like him and the obvious girl that he's going to end up with, and you're just like, oh jeez, is he really going to end up with that girl? And then like it actually ends up taking a detour, and a really good one, because there's a hot chick, and you like, just by watching anime you kind of assume like, oh, this is the hot chick that he's always going to want but is never going to be with him. And then here's the girl that he's always going to kind of be with, but like keep her at arm's length when the hot girl shows up. Be like, oh yeah, no, I can totally hang out with the hot girl. No, I'm not going to hang out with the normal girl. She's just a friend. Blah 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 blah. So you see that's kind of going on, and it's just like one of those things where it's just like you've seen it so many times that by seeing it you're just kind of disappointed. But they do it well, actually. They do it in a great way. What they do actually is they have him end up dating the hot girl, and they're in a space fight battle, whatever you want to call it, and they're almost about to die, and he's freaking out over because yeah, in your last moments of life you'd probably freak out too. And he asks her why she isn't freaking out, and she says, oh, the goddess will protect us, or something along those lines. And he ends up like kind of freaking out about that, like, what do you mean? Like, it's kind of as if you're on a plane that's heading straight down, and you look to the person next to you and you say, why aren't you scared? And they say, Jesus will protect us. Like, that's basically how it was, exactly, pretty much. And it's a very nice commentary on religion and relationships, at least in my opinion. That's what I enjoyed about it, was it gave him, they didn't break up because she's stupid or anything like that. They broke up because she's a religious zealot, and he thinks that she believes in her religion almost too much. And like, seriously, that's why I watch anime. Because of these little pockets of just groundbreaking things that you would never see on American television or movies. And so eventually, like, he ends up distancing himself from the hot girl, and eventually he goes to the normal girl, the girl that, and like, it's very obvious that they should be together, because emotionally they get together well, and mentally they get together well, as opposed to the hot chick who he just likes for shallow reasons. And so I really liked that a lot. Maybe it's because I've had like a semi-similar relationship to that, but I mean, it was just like, it was so great to see it, and in any kind of artistic medium, because I really hate how spiritualism is kind of just naturally universally accepted in art. It's like, oh, you believe in God, that's beautiful, and it's like, what? How can you call a belief beautiful? Like, there's no weight to it. It's just a shallow yes or no switch. And so you see, my opinion is just that if it's not going to like mean anything, or if it's just you believe in it just because, then that's something you should kind of like step back from and have a reason to do something, not just because and that. So anyway, they end up getting back together, or normal guy, or weak guy and normal girl. And it's pretty alright, they get in a relationship. And him and his best friend actually start to distance themselves from each other. He has a brother and he also has a best friend. And his best friend and brother actually end up working on the same space while he works on this the flight deck. And he actually ends up asking to be replaced or whatever, so that he can go on the actual robot ship over to help out there, to get away from the religious girl, really. So that was actually, a nice way. It was just neat how he was constantly like pushing himself away from her. Anyway, so he ends up doing that, and it was alright, it was enjoyable, and things like that. And this is where the story starts to like kind of like get into like multiple layers or whatever of things. Like as I said, Blue ran away. He never got arrested. All the bullies, they got arrested and sent into like these kinds of prison cells, I guess you could say. And Charlie, he ends up sticking with the girl, and she, they actually, at first it's very obvious that she's just using him, and then by seeing him stick with her, she ends up changing and accepting him. And I really like that a lot, however, because there's not really a lot of character development in this, but it's enough where it's like when you see it, it's very, it's like, oh wow, deserves an applause. So anyway, one little thing though about Charlie and his girlfriend, I forget what her name is, but if you actually look online, her gender is actually listed as a man. And the reason because of that is, in one episode, her sister, who's never really revealed to be her sister until that point, at least in my opinion, calls her Big Bro. And so at that point you're like, what? And it slipped by me completely when I saw it. But no, apparently she's a man. And so I like that as well. Like, it's never really brought up or, directly discussed, but it's one of those, it's a little hidden gem. So it's an Easter egg in a sense. And I like that because, I like when, the show just pushes forward on a lot of different fronts. It's not just a complete pushing into your face. It's more of, just these little pockets of things that you would never see on, like, other little shows. So anyway, after that, the show starts to wind down for a bit. After they can't go to Uranus or Saturn or whatever planet was blown up, they end up going to Pluto, because apparently that's the religious zealot's father's planet, because he's a prime minister there. Again, getting back to that whole, is this a diplomatic thing or whatever? But, so yeah, that's like another little thing that's never really discussed, but it's like, okay, whatever. So she actually ends up starting her own little cult, of a sense. Granted, it's in that same religion it's accepted on her planet, but at the same time, it's really nice how it goes forward, where you find out that it's kind of implied that she killed her last boyfriend, actually. And it's kind of implied that by being rejected by the main character, she's kind of going through an emotional problem as well. In fact, she actually sends some of her believers to attack his current girlfriend, the normal girl. And so, that's like a thing, I guess. No, he ends up confronting her about it. And he also ends up confronting his brother and the leaders. And he actually ends up getting shot in the shoulder because he finds Blue, and Blue has a gun that he got from the terrorists, and the gun is a very nice symbolism of power, because it's the only gun on the ship, and blah 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 blah. And to get back to it, its simplicity. You point at something that you don't want to exist anymore, and so he ends up pointing it at his brother, who becomes kind of the de facto leader, or at least the head figure. He's really being pushed forward by these other, sort of administrator. And the administrator is very kind of, the nefarious ones, so to speak. So anyway, after that, they end up going away and things, and the gun gets wrestled away from the main character, and he gets shot in the shoulder and is left bleeding. And he ends up, he asks the girl, the religious zealot girl, for help, and she kind of, by being rejected by him, she ends up like trying to strangle him, and then eventually just like leaves him thinking that he's dead. And then his body's found, and they administer surgery on him. And at this point, the military sheeps are coming onto them, and they're attacking. And they end up getting everybody on the ship except, like, I guess it was the level D. They end up segregating people by their working class in the belief that it will help stop, crime. And so, as you can assume, they obviously segregate them by kind of classes, like poor people all live over here, middle class here, I think it goes from levels A to D. So, as you can see, when you put more poor people with other poor people, there's kind of that, it basically kind of accepts the whole belief of, they're going to rob each other because they don't have a lot. So, even the tiniest increment will help a little bit more. And so that's kind of the thing. Anyway, so they end up getting like pretty much everyone onto the robot ship because they're basically, the big ship is being boarded by the military crew, and it's basically like a last-ditch effort to just try to get to Pluto. And everybody, or at least all the children kind of get shot by this sort of like rubbery glue that kind of sticks them to the ground. And I would have liked it a little bit more if it was violence, because the ship has so many background extras where you really wouldn't have, like, there would have been no necessary like emotional attachment to them dying. It kind of would have screwed up the ending just a little bit, but whatever. So at some point they find out that, all the ship crew is children, and they're like, well, why are we attacking children? And then it's found out that it was really all just some big misunderstanding, like a 70s sitcom. So basically that's the problem. And so they're like, oh, okay, I guess you can all come home now. And then the last episode is a big recap, the main character, his brother, basically everyone who's on the ship is offered to come back onto the ship because apparently it won't work without that crew. And so the crew's all invited back on board, and blah. Then it starts working again, and I don't know. I didn't really like the ending. Like, it's a nice ending. Everyone gets their knots tied up. And there's actually a lot I didn't discuss over, and a lot of things I didn't even discuss on this. So, I mean, it's really great. There's lots of layers and lots of mini stories in it that I think are really great overall. And, the ending, though, it's just so, like, blah. It's just one of those things where they just have the last episode is not, like, part of the story necessarily, but it's just more of like a, everything's okay now, don't worry, kind of story. And so it's just one of those things where you're just like, whatever, just get it over with. It's 30 minutes of, everything's okay, everything's gonna be fine. And they get on the ship, and he gets his post back, and they're like, where should we go for our first journey? And then, like, it's discussed, like, oh, well, I heard everyone didn't make it onto the ship. Let's go to Pluto, that planet where that girl with the religious zealot has her father. And so, it's just that kind of thing going on. And you're just like, whatever. Or at least I'm just like that. I'm like, whatever. This isn't like a story anymore. This is just, it's a happy ending. And so they all have a happy ending. And it's discussed that apparently the reason why they want the children to go on the spaceship to, train it or whatever. As I said, the squids turn into spaceships. They also take on the forms of humans. So basically, the point is that they interact with humans. They just dress weirdly, and so basically, yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, it's like all these things where it's like they really did have too much in there, and I feel now that I speak about it, it's easier to sympathize with the writer as to why so many things are just touched upon and not really explained. You know, they had a lot going on, and they kind of bit off more than they could chew. So that's the thing. It's a great show. The animation looks a little bit dated now. But if you can enjoy Cowboy Bebop, it's basically like a year after Cowboy Bebop in terms of animation quality. So, I like Cowboy Bebop, I like Infinite Ryvius. In fact, I think Infinite Ryvius is better, but I understand why people like Cowboy Bebop. Anyway, with that said, I actually hope you ever watch it, because it's great, and it's enjoyable, and you can even watch it online for free. Infinite Ryvius. Later.